Hello everybody, this is our study. Welcome to our study in the Gospel of Mark. We will be in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 14 shortly. Give it a couple minutes here to tag, sing a couple songs, and then we'll get into the text. This has been a longer study than I anticipated, but it has been a good one. Hello everybody, this is our study. A couple minutes here. So if you have your Bibles, I would invite you to turn with me to the book of Mark. It will be on the screen once we get going here. But, it's always good to have a physical copy. Just tagging some people here before we get into it. Alright, almost there. Alright, cool. Hope you all are doing well. Let's sing a song or two before we get in, give people a chance to get into a study, and then we will start. Without him, number 184. Without him I could do nothing. Without him I truly fail. Without him I would be drifting like a ship without a sail. Jesus, oh Jesus, do you know him today? Do not turn him away, oh Jesus. Without him, how lost I would be. Without him, I would be dying. Without him, I'd be enslaved. Without him, life would be hopeless. But with Jesus, thank God I'm saved. Jesus, oh Jesus, do you know him today? He cannot turn you away. Do not turn him away, oh Jesus, oh Jesus. Without him, lost I would be. The way the cross leads home, and then we'll get into it. I must need go home by the way of the cross. There's no other way but this. I shall never get sight of the gates of light if the way of the cross I miss. The way of the cross leads home. The way of the cross leads home. It is sweet to know as I onward go. The way of the cross leads home. I must need go on in the blood-sprinkled way, the path that the Savior trod. If I ever climb to the heights sublime, when the soul is at home with God. The way of the cross leads home. The way of the cross leads home. It is sweet to know as I onward go. The way of the cross leads home. Then I bid farewell to the way of the world, to walk in it nevermore. For my Lord says, come and seek my home away, wait at the open door. The way of the cross leads home. The way of the cross leads home. It's sweet to know as I onward go. The way of the cross leads home. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Mark 9. That is where we will be studying today. Continuing our study in Mark. In chapter 9, you're going to notice that there is a lot of action. In fact, just to review, we've seen in the first 13 verses last week that Jesus was transfigured on the mountain where his face shone about by like as radiant as the sun, and they standing with him was Moses and Elijah discussing his death, as we looked at last week in Luke. And we see Peter in that text wanting to build them 3 tabernacles, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, thus putting them on the same plane. And a voice comes down to correct Peter, and he says, this is my beloved son, hear him. Moses and Elijah had their purpose, and they were great people to lead the people to Jesus, but that's just what they were. They were leaders. They were never meant to be praised as the end goal. The end goal was Jesus, and so we see that there in what we looked at last week. And so as we continue through this chapter, I don't think we'll get through chapter 9 today, So we'll probably get to most of this next week. But we're going to see today in verses 14 through 29 that a boy is healed. We're going to see in verses 30 and 32 that Jesus again is going to predict his death and resurrection. We're going to see the disciples' attitude and asking Jesus who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And verses 38 through 42, anyone who is not against us is for us. And verses 43 through 49, not letting the children stumble. And of course, verses 50 to 51, tasteless salt is worthless. And so let's get into the text with this boy being healed. I'm going to full screen this because it's not that big. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately, when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, and greeted him. And he asked the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit, and whatever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." He answered and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed and fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe, help me with my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit came out, convulsed him greatly. Verse 26. Then the spirit came out. Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he arose, and when he had come into his house, his disciples asked him, privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." And so a few interesting things to talk about here. Verses 14 through 17. Jesus gets to his disciples, and a crowd is around them, and they're discussing something. And he asks the scribes, "What are you discussing?" And one from the crowd, the father of this mute man, says, "I brought my son who has a mute spirit." And he gives us details in verse 18. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth and gnashes his teeth and become rigid. So I asked your disciples if they could do anything, but they could not. And so many speculate that the reason why they could not do it is because they did not have that ability. But if you remember back in chapter 6 that we looked at a couple weeks ago, Jesus gave him, excuse me, where was that? Yeah, in chapter 6 a few weeks ago, the disciples had this authority. Look at chapter 6 and verse, uh, let's see, 6, look first at chapter 6 verse 7. And he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out two by two and gave them power over the unclean spirit. So they had power over the unclean spirit. They should have been able to cast this one out. And so in verse 13 it says, "And they cast out many demons, and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them." And so it's not as if they couldn't do it. Jesus had given them this authority in chapter 6. And so what is it? There's something else here going on. And I think verse 19 says something about their faith. "O faithless generation, how long shall I bear with you?" And this is going to become evident in verse 27 when they ask, "Why couldn't we cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come up by nothing but prayer and fasting." So their faith wasn't in the right place. If Jesus did miracles only by the power of God, and he believed in that power of God to do miracles. The disciples did miracles, and they believed in chapter 6. I think that's evident that the language here in chapter 6, because Jesus had given them the commission to do these things. So they had confidence, but they didn't have confidence here. And so that's why they could not do it. It's not because they did not have the authority to, but they just didn't have the faith. Not the kind of faith they had back in chapter 6. And so we see in verses 20 to 22, they bring the spirit, boy with the spirit, to Jesus, and Jesus sees how bad he is and asks, how long has this been happening to him? And he says, from childhood. And so we get some more details, more details in verse 22 that the Spirit makes his son be thrown into the fire, and he makes him drown in the water. And notice that this unclean spirit before, like in chapter 1, we've seen another one that is confessing that Jesus is the Son of God. We don't see this here because back in verse 17 it says, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. And so now it's not like the spirit didn't know who Jesus was. He's just mute, which is interesting. I don't know if that means he couldn't talk or he wasn't talking. I don't know about that. But anyways, and so this man tells Jesus about his son and says, can you help him? And at the end of verse 33, Jesus says, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Now, evidently, he had a problem with his belief because he says, Lord, I believe, help me with the parts I don't understand. Help me with my unbelief. And so I believe you are able to do this, but I don't understand the whole picture, I think he's saying. And so, when Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, deaf and dumb spirit, I command you to come out of him and enter him no more. Then the spirit cried out greatly, convulsed greatly, and came out of him. This is one of the points where I don't know all about what the spirit could and could not do, because he calls him a deaf and dumb spirit. And then in verse 26, he says the spirit cried out. And so he doesn't say deaf and mute there. I wonder if dumb is just the same word there. And so, anyway, I don't know what to do with that. Maybe one of you has a comment about that. But anyways, and so the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said, he is dead. This just This just speaks to the influence that this deaf and dumb spirit had on this boy. Uh, the he almost crippled him, and so uh, in fact, maybe it is possible that Jesus raised him in the next verse, and so make no mistake, these demons are powerful. They make you do so many odd things. I'm so glad we don't have to worry about them today. And so he leaves this boy dead, but Jesus raises him. And so verse 28, 29, we've already talked about. The disciples could not cast this demon out, not because they weren't able to. They had that authority from chapter 6, but their faith wasn't where it needed to be. And so Jesus in the next couple of verses, we're going to get his second time in predicting his death and resurrection, just like he did in chapter 8. And so let's read verse 30 to 32. Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it. Remember that? That was his start of his ministry there. For he taught his disciples and said to them, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and after he is killed he will rise the third day. But they did not understand this saying, and were afraid to ask him. And so I wonder what the difference is between back in chapter 8 when they did get it and they rebuked him, and in chapter 9. Because in chapter 8 it says, and he began to, verse 31, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer and be rejected and killed, and after 3 days rise again. And Peter gets it on this occasion, but apparently the disciples don't understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask. It was a scary saying, and so maybe there's more to that I'm not understanding, but it is interesting the difference. Maybe it was that they didn't want to understand. Peter understood back in chapter 8. Chapter 9 says, but they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him about it. So that might indicate they had some idea, but they didn't comprehend it fully. They didn't, at the very least, they didn't want to know more. They were afraid to ask. And so we see that there in verse 32. So right after this, the disciples are classic, and they are discussing on who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. And so verse 33 through 37, then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what was it you disputed among yourselves on the road? But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest. And he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all, and servant of all. Then he took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives me, receives one of these little children in my name, receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. And so this is an embarrassing moment for the disciples. They're still not getting it. Right before this, Jesus had just said the Son of Man is going to be betrayed and die, and 3 days later be raised. And so what are they discussing on the side? Well, they're discussing who will be the greatest. So if you notice, sometimes, like back in chapter 8, where Peter makes the confession that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, he gets it then. And then after Jesus predicts his death, burial, and resurrection, the first time Peter tries to rebuke him, here they're not getting it. They're with Jesus, they're watching him serve, and they're still looking at some misunderstandings about the kingdom. And so, Jesus says if you want to be great in the kingdom, you are going to have to be last of all and servant of all. And so when you really think about this mentality, it's so backwards to what our society says. Like, society says if you want to be on top, you're going to have to step on somebody's throat to get there. But Jesus says if you want to be on top, you go to the bottom and you serve. And he had just talked about how he's going to die and be delivered. He is the servant of all. Follow his example. And so he gives them a illustration. He shows them a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one of these children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. And so Jesus uses this child as an example of humility, as an example of purity, and so it's the exact opposite attitude of who's the greatest. It's the attitude of children. You think about children, they're pure, they're holy, they're innocent, they're dependable, they're trusting. all those are kingdom qualities, Jesus says. If you want to be the greatest, be like the children. Again, this is something that the world would scoff at and laugh at and say this is so backwards, but the kingdom is backwards. It's Jesus says in Matthew 7 on the Sermon on the Mount that wide is the gate to hell, and many will be that find it, but few is the way, near is the way to heaven, and few there be that find it. These principles uh, these principles that seem so backwards to the world is because they're from the narrow path, and not many people are willing to follow the path. And so, if not only do you receive Jesus, if you become like little children and receive little children, but you receive God. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. Well, how do we receive God? We do the will of the Father. Love me, keep my commandments. John 14:15. 2 John 1:9 says, He who abides not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God, but he who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. So it's by keeping his commandments. That's how we know that we love him, and that's how we receive him as a little child. And so let's move on to the next section here. 48 to 41. John answered him, saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. But Jesus said, Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil against me. For he who is not against us is on our side. For whoever gives a cup of cold water in my name, because you belong to Christ, surely I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. So apparently, there's someone that doesn't follow close to the apostles casting out demons, and he says, Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. And so he's doing what he's doing what he's supposed to. If it's really true, he's not gonna speak evil of Jesus. And then he says, verse 40, something that's really critical. For he who is not against us is on our side. There's no middle ground with Jesus. You're either on his side doing his works, or you're not. There's no 1 foot over here, 1 foot over there type deal. You have to be all in or all out. And so, for whoever gives a cup of cold water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, I say to you, he will no means lose his reward. Guys, it's okay. Jesus says it. If it's in my name, if it follows my precepts, it's okay. He won't lose his reward. We'll, we'll see. Don't cast him out. Uh, don't forbid him. Uh, if he's doing things that are with me, that's good. That's great. And so that's what that section teaches. And then we come to 42 through 47. Uh, and then he kind of comes back to this idea of the little ones. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him if a millstone was hung around his neck and he was thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed than having two hands to go into hell, into the fire that shall not be quenched, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off, for it is better to enter your life lame rather than having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that shall not be quenched, where the worm does not die, and the fire is not quenched. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into the fire, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And so Jesus connects causing the little children to stumble with this illustration that if you cause these little children to stumble, it will be better for you just to have a millstone drug around your neck and plummet into the sea. And so he talks about if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And so 43 through 47, he's saying if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed. If you're doing something with your hands or doing something with your feet, verse 45, cut it off because it is better for you to enter life maimed than have 2 feet go to hell. If you have a problem with your hands, if you have any problem, cut it off. Do whatever you have to do. If it's pornography, get rid of the computer. Get rid of your phone or get an app on your phone that blocks you from seeing it. Do whatever it takes to get to heaven. And so, in verse 48, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. You don't want to go there. And so he says this in verse 44, where the worm does not die, fire is not quenched. Verse 46, verse 48. And so hell is eternal. Whatever you can do to avoid it, avoid it. If it means losing the TV, lose the TV. Lose your phone. or get an app to block certain things. Trust me, you will not miss your phone if it means you gotta have it. Cut it off. Cut this in from your life. Let's finish this chapter here. For everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Salt is good, but if salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt on yourself and have peace with one another. 4. As a result, everyone will be seasoned with fire. We're going to go through trials, right? And so that's a good thing. Trials and temptations will keep us out of trouble and into God's grace. And so have salt in yourselves, have peace with one another, and have peace with God. Well, we are going to be getting into our chapter 10. The last half of this book is pretty deep. Thank you for joining me, and we will walk through chapter 10 together. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.